The tallest building in Europe is located in Poland. This is the Warsaw skyscraper, and its height is 310 meters. This height is an absolute record for Europe. And this is the tallest skyscraper in China, with a height of 632 meters. The question arises. Why can't Europe build a building whose height would be even remotely close to skyscrapers in Asia or America? This video is about why skyscrapers are not allowed to be built in European cities. Right now you will learn why Europeans hate tall buildings. I will talk about the key difference between European and American cities. The first skyscraper in history was built in Chicago in 1885. It had an incredible height of 42 meters and 10 floors. You must admit that it is not very impressive now. However, at the time, it was the tallest building in the world. Later, more and more high-rise buildings appeared in Chicago. It is interesting that this city, not New York, is the birthplace of skyscrapers. Obviously, today the idea of skyscrapers is completely different than it was then. Today, a skyscraper can be considered a building with a height of 150 meters or more. This is about 40 to 50 floors. There are about 100 of these buildings across Europe. However, New York City alone has almost 3 times as many skyscrapers as the whole of Europe. So how did it happen that rich developed cities in Europe hardly ever build skyscrapers? First, let's take a look at history. At the beginning of the 20th century, the United States began to develop very rapidly. The economy grew at a frantic pace. This led to the rapid expansion of American cities, and the United States became a symbol of a new era. Europe at that time preferred to follow tradition and preserve its historical. Most European cities were already quite densely built up by the time the United States started building its first skyscrapers. Some residential buildings in Europe are even older than the United States itself. Therefore, there was simply not enough space in European cities to fit giant buildings. Okay, this explains why skyscraper construction started in the United States and not in Europe, but it doesn't explain why Europe continued to lag behind. In fact, it gets even more interesting. The fact is that nowadays the most important task of skyscrapers is to save space. This is especially true for countries like China, for example. China is home to more than 10 million people. Almost all of them work. Thus, in order to compactly place them all in offices, skyscrapers have to be built in the business centers of cities. In Europe, however, there are no such problems with overpopulation. Of course, there are other reasons for building skyscrapers, and not the least of them is elementary pontification. I'm sure you've thought more than once that the more skyscrapers a city has, the more developed it is, as if they are financial muscles that cities show off to the world to show how cool and awesome they are. I used to think so myself. Before the most interesting part of this video, I'll ask you to like and subscribe to channel to help it grow. Thank you. Okay, now let's look at London. As we know, this is perhaps the most important financial center in the world. Billions of dollars are traded there every day. The world's largest companies have their offices there. And what we see, or rather what we don't see, are countless tall skyscrapers. There are only 30 of them in London. When we look at them, their unusual shape immediately catches our eye. It is so for a reason. There are 13 so-called protected views in the city. These are places that must have a view of St. Paul's Cathedral. In London, it is forbidden to build buildings that would block the view of this cathedral from one of the 13 places. So it turns out that in order not to block the protected view, the architects came up with such bizarre forms. Europeans don't need tall modern buildings, they block the sky and spoil the historical atmosphere of the city. Europeans understand that what is a symbol of modern architecture today may turn into a shame for the city in the future. This once happened to Soviet Khrushchevs and similar buildings. Let's make sure of this. Let's take Lisbon as an example. There is an observation deck in Edward VII Park. It offers a great view of the entire park. Now imagine what the view would be like if a bunch of 400-meter skyscrapers were built there. All the beauty of this historic place would be distorted, and the view of the river would be blocked. But don't think that Lisbon is an isolated case. European cities simply do not want to build skyscrapers in order not to spoil the historical value of the city. Here's Germany as an example. It has only 16 buildings taller than 150 meters, and interestingly, 15 of them are in Frankfurt. Even the capital Berlin does not have a single skyscraper. An even more illustrative example is Munich. There, it is generally forbidden to build buildings that are taller than the 100-meter high Cathedral of the Holy Virgin. A very interesting situation has also arisen in Paris, where the construction of tall buildings within the city is prohibited so that they do not overshadow the historical landmarks, such as the Eiffel Tower. However, as you can see in the photos, there is one exception to this rule. It is a building that Parisians hate with all their hearts. This is the Montparnasse Tower, and its height is 210 meters, and it is the tallest skyscraper in Paris. It is not difficult to guess why it is so disliked. You must admit that this huge dark box looks completely out of place next to the Eiffel Tower and other historical buildings. There is even a statement that the best view of Paris is from the roof of the Montparnasse skyscraper, because this is the only place in Paris from which this building is not visible. After the completion of construction in 1969, the authorities realized their mistake, and subsequently a ban was introduced to build buildings taller than 35 meters. And what about the famous Parisian financial center La Défense, which is just so dotted with skyscrapers? Well, it was allowed to be built because it turned out that it was far enough away from the city. However, even it has only 21 buildings taller than 150 meters. What is the tallest building you have ever seen? Write it in the comments, we will be very interested to read it. Thank you for watching this video to the end, subscribe to the channel because there is a lot more interesting content coming.